Welcome back to Sneaker Impact News. Today's special guest is Kelly Leviker from Public Interest Research Group, PIRG. Kelly is PIRG's Beyond Plastic advocate. She has recently been focused on organizing, researching, and lobbying against plastic pellet pollution. She is helping to organize plastic pellet hunts around the country. These are citizen science efforts to identify plastic pellet pollution. She has also been pushing for state and federal legislation to help curb plastic pellet pollution. Hi, Kelly. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
Awesome. Yeah, I'm great. Really excited to have this opportunity to chat with you today. Where are you joining us from?
Denver, Colorado.
Awesome. We're on the Eastern time zone. You're out in the mountains. We got introduced through Zero Waste Miami. Excited to learn more and shine a light on this important topic. So tell us about PIRG and your role with them.
First off, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to come on your podcast and talk a little bit about pellets. So I am the Beyond Plastics advocate for PIRG, the Public Interest Research Group. And so it's an organization that really looks after what do people in America need? What are some of the ridiculous problems that we have in front of us and what can we fight? And one of those things are plastic pellets. And maybe before I launch into a lot about what I'm doing about plastic pellets, maybe I should tell folks what are plastic pellets?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean,
So
I have an
plastic
idea, but I'm thinking like just pieces of toys and wrappers and things that break down, but that's probably not exactly the case, is it?
No, so all those things are secondary plastics. So plastic pellets are called primary microplastics. And I actually have some pellets I can show viewers if they can see these little things.
Oh, wow.
These are plastic pellets. And so this is like when plastic comes from oil and gas. And so the first product that is recognizably plastic is basically a plastic pellet. And so after it's converted from oil and gas, it's made into these little things. And then these little things are shipped to companies that make stuff of plastic where they melt and mold them into plastic pens, plastic bags, car bumpers, vinyl records, and all sorts of good stuff. Or, all sorts of stuff.
So petrochemicals are how they create plastics, and they are ubiquitous. They're used for everything. They're the building
For
blocks.
everything. Yeah, so these are the building blocks. So of plastic. So everything you have plastic, even though these things are very rarely found, or like most people don't generally see these things. But
That's what
this,
manufacturers use.
yeah, without this stuff, you wouldn't have half of the things that are around you right now, probably.
Wow. Yeah, I'm looking at my
Okay.
phone. I'm looking at, well, this is made out of ceramic, but most things, and, people are really concerned about plastic, and they should be. There's a lot of health
Hmm.
concerns, and there's a lot of ecological concerns. That's a cool title, Beyond Plastic Advocate. So I assume you do a lot of education.
Hmm. Yeah, especially right now. So one of my main focuses is on plastic pellets, but sorry, in general, I'm interested in plastic. So I'm looking also into microplastics and looking at the health effects. And when we think about the health effects of plastics, it's like twofold. Like we think about, first of all, like when they break down and then we find them in our brains or breast tissue, breast milk, or everywhere else we're finding them. But there's also all these chemicals that are in these things. And so those chemicals also leach. So it's like twofold. You've got both effects that we need to be thinking about. And so, yes, I'm looking into a lot of that stuff. And then also just trying to raise awareness about the different issues. And then when it comes to plastic pellets, like people don't normally know what these things are. And they don't know that there's such an issue. And it's estimated that 10 trillion of these end up in our oceans every year, where it takes forever for plastic to degrade. So they just end up like accumulating and accumulating and accumulating. And then that ends up to being part of our microplastic problem. And as well, like animals, they end up eating them and the chemicals are leaching. And it's just kind of getting like a bigger and bigger problem each year.
So accumulating in the environment and in our bodies because we eat things that are eating them. And we
Exactly.
also will ingest them just through, I mean, how else do people get them in their bodies besides consuming fish or other things that might consume them?
Yeah, I mean, if we talk about microplastics, like these are considered microplastics, but you can see them. And so there's like sometimes a little bit of confusion. So to be a microplastic, it has to be under 5 millimeters in size. So these range between 3 to 5 millimeters in size. So this one is not like something that we're going to get through the air like other microplastics or through our water. Like I think if you saw this in your water, you'd probably be like, whoa, there, I don't think I'm going to drink that water. That's what happens with a lot of other microplastics. But nonetheless, these things still break down, and then we can start to get them in by those other means of how we get other microplastics in our body. But yes, the general way a person would get a full pellet in their body would be through eating something that's eaten one of these.
Okay. But they can still get into our bodies through the water supply and through um, uh, there's other ways, right? Like I know when you do laundry, even it can break down. I read that polyester breaks down microplastics into
Oh,
our
for
into our
sure.
water supply.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's definitely broken
Yes.
down in some of our laundry. Whether or not it goes directly into the our city is aware of this. Is how big is the problem? I mean, and the health concerns.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about like polyester and stuff, I think there's concern people are starting to take action on that. And so, for example, in France, there's a mandatory rule that washing machines need to be fitted with filters on their washing machine so they catch a lot of those polyester or other plastic fibers from our clothing. So that could be from lycra, that could be from yoga pants, or we got a lot of clothes that are made of
I
plastic.
was just reading the other day that like your outdoor gear could be poisoning you, the forever chemicals and like the water repellent, jacket that you get from REI. I don't want to pick on REI because I love the outdoors, but we pay a lot of money for these fancy, products sometimes, and they can have chemicals in them and plastics and even polyester. Like I'm wearing polyester, runners wear
Mhm,
polyester for dry fit.
mhm.
So we have to be conscious. How can we in the US do something about that with washing our clothes? Do we
Yeah, I
keep our
think
washers outfitted like they do in Europe?
yeah, I mean, I believe, and don't misquote me here, okay? But I think in Oregon and maybe Washington and maybe a few other states, they're working also on legislation to have it so it's mandatory to put those filters on washing machines. But it's
Okay.
something you can do yourself. You can also just make sure your washing machine has that or put it on it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna
Or you Or there's also like, if you don't have, like, it could be one of those things you're conscious of. I'm going to buy this polyester clothing because for this particular purpose. But if it's just a shirt that I'm wearing out at night that I don't really need it to be polyester, I don't really need it to be plastic, put that into one of your like lists that of like, how am I deciding what clothes to buy?
so
So that could
cotton
be.
is safer for the environment in general. I mean, I know there's chemicals in the cultivation of cotton, but when you buy
Mhm,
organic cotton, that's probably your best option, or hemp, or I know
mhm,
bamboo nowadays are making clothing out of too. So these are
mhm,
alternatives to polyester. So just be aware of the material you're wearing and buying.
mhm, mhm.
Plastic water
Yeah.
bottles, I'm assuming, are a big issue for microplastics, or no, not so much. That's just a misconception.
Yeah, they are a big issue, and it's, I don't remember the exact statistics, but there's been a lot of studies done on how many microplastics are just in one water bottle, and it's pretty astounding.
And that statistic that we eat like a credit card worth of microplastics, is it how often, a month or something?
I think there was that statistic out, but then somebody was questioning exactly how truthful that is or like how much is there. So I don't like to quote that exact statistic, but there's definitely, it's every human is getting some
Yeah, I
plastic
read
from.
just yesterday. I mean, just I was on my own little reading journey. You
Mhm,
sent us some amazing articles that I'm going to be sharing with people about how they can protect themselves, how they can get involved. We're going to talk about that later. Um, you're doing the work of literally that needs to be done by more people, like the government, or like just it needs to be made. That's why we're doing this today, to get a spotlight on this issue. You're our first microplastics expert we've ever had on this podcast.
woo!
Deep today, but you know, um, What can we do? What more can citizens do?
I mean, I think it's like one thing you can do is do a plastic assessment of your home. So you go through like room by room and be like, where do I have plastic? And if you're looking at the like totality, the environmental impact, it doesn't necessarily make sense to just throw out things that are still good, but things start to need to be replaced. So kind of create a list of what are those things that are going to need to be replaced that could be replaced with a non-plastic alternative. Like look at your cookingware. If you're heating anything up in plastic, that's not a good idea. So if you're like, don't ever microwave stuff in plastic Tupperware. If you're going to microwave, put it on a plate. But then it's like, what about your spatulas or what other sort of cooking things you are? Because when you're heating plastic, that's when it has a tendency to start to leach more.
Yep.
So you want to make sure that's one place that's important. But then you can also go into your bathroom and be like, okay, well, is there stuff here that I could start to replace by going to a refill store and refilling some of this stuff? And then one thing that I know, this is just a little tip for my own life, is like when I go to some refill stores in Denver, sometimes what they sell is more concentrated than what you would get in a normal store.
Hmm.
And so sometimes it seems like the price tag is more expensive up front. But then it's like I bought one thing of like just a normal house spray to clean off your toilet or the floors or whatever. But it's like a concentration of 8. So it's like one bottle looked like it was really expensive, but then it's like, but I'm actually buying 8 bottles.
I see. So you
So you
add
just have to
water,
read
or it's super concentrated.
So
Buying it,
you just have to,
yeah.
so
Refill
yeah, buy milk, refill,
using
and then
glass,
doing
mason jars. I know that's a big one, right? Just
Mhm.
trying not to use plastic for everything that, especially for, utensils and straws and everything. I mean, I have a bunch of metal straws and I try not to encourage that when you go to a restaurant, of course, there's a classic example of you ask for no plastic, they accidentally bring you plastic. You don't want to be mad at that person because they're so busy. Sometimes they have the best heart. They didn't mean to hurt you in that way. So I've often heard the analogy of don't get upset at that person. Instead, just, remove it and just, you have to do the best you can, but there's no reason to go on a war path either, right? Like there's science and there's methods to do this in a peaceful way.
Most certainly. And I mean, right now there's so much plastic being made. It's really good to try to do what you can. But, ultimately, if they give you that fork or that something, it's okay.
Or like the takeout stuff. Yeah. But if you can request it, and I know some people take their own containers
Mhm,
to take out food, for take home. So you don't have to get, I
mhm,
know they ban styrofoam in some cities, but not all cities.
mhm.
Styrofoam also a plastic?
It sure is.
I would think
It
so.
comes in like I showed you what a plastic pellet looks like.
Hmm.
Styrofoam gets even smaller. It's like the tip of your pen.
Okay.
That's like the width of it. That's the
Mhm.
size of like a primary styrofoam pellet.
Wow. And then they just congeal it together with some type of binder, or they melt it together. And
They melt. I'm not quite sure on that process, but they pop it. I know that bit. So it comes as like a condensed little bubble, and then they
what
pop
type
it.
of chemicals you were talking about? Chemical? Are these PFASs? Are these forever chemicals? Are these petrochemicals? Do you know are they hormone influencers? Like, they got the I forget what the hormone influencers are called.
Endocrine disruptors.
Endocrine disruptors, yeah, stuff like
I mean, we don't actually like, when you get food, it has to come with a list of ingredients. But when you get plastic, it doesn't have to come with a list of ingredients. So we can know, like, in general, sometimes what is in these things like flame retardants, endocrine disruptors, PFAS. And we know sometimes, like, okay, PFAS is in things that you want a non-stick, like a non-stick pan or waterproof things. Those are in general where PFAS is. Then you have like BPAs, those can be in the lining of like tin cans.
that. Yep. Yeah, you got to look for
But
BPA lining in your when you go grocery shop.
yeah, but we only have like kind of ideas. So it's like even when there's like plastic pellet pollution and they're trying to figure out like which company did this come from, this is proprietary information, what actual chemicals they use. So you can kind of like, you can get them tested and then you can kind of find out what chemicals are in them. But we're kind we're kind of in a black hole. We don't really know a lot of what chemicals are going into these things.
You're still doing a lot of investigations, I understand, and working on pinpointing the causes of the pollution, or not the causes, but the sources of the pollution in the sense of who are these companies. I want to get into that. But first, I want to ask you, what got you interested in microplastics, and tell us about your journey, even start back when you were a child. I mean, has this always been a
Mhm.
passion to be environmentally conscious?
Yeah, I've had a very weird journey, to
Yeah.
be frank with you.
Well, we're
But
open to hearing.
I grew up in Colorado, and my father was building a log house up in the mountains of Colorado. So every summer, we would go up into the Rocky Mountains, and I would spend all summer kind of like wandering around the forest around where he was building the log house. And so snowboarding became really near and dear to my heart too, because I was in the mountains all the time and I just loved it. And so then I felt like I grew up with a strong connection to nature, being in it quite a lot. Um, and so I remember I first got interested in climate change because back when I was a kid, I remember hearing that it's going to affect how much snow is in the mountains, and that's going to affect how I can snowboard. So it's a real selfish reason, and that's how I got into it. And I was like, "Whoa,
But
I
also
don't
it's
like that
affecting the
idea."
whole landscape. I mean, you hear about the glaciers and like, this is a big problem, you know?
Yeah. So that's how, like, I'd say I had that strong foundation, but I always, since I was really young, I had an interest. I wanted to make some change. And so in my undergraduate degree, I studied languages. So I studied actually at the University of Sydney in Australia, and I studied Russian and Arabic. And then I lived in Russia for a long time, and I
Okay.
studied abroad in Lebanon. But
Oh,
as I
that's
was there, I was
our
like,
founder is Lebanese.
oh, yeah, oh,
Founder's
wonderful.
yeah, he's Lebanese American in the family. They're awesome. Yeah, so you're gonna have to meet them, and they go there every year. They have family there in Landon. So,
Oh,
um,
it's such a beautiful country.
but we want to hear about the differences between Russia, Australia, Lebanon, the United States. How does that? And we were talking yesterday. You spent some time in Ethiopia. You
Yeah, it's
all
see,
travel.
I can't even begin to sum up everything because it's like a really weird, weird story. But yes, then I lived in Ethiopia for a long time, and that's kind of where specifically I got into plastic. And so when I was in Ethiopia, I was working at the university, and we started the first program for landscape architecture, which was a master's degree for landscape architecture in Ethiopia.
Wow.
And that was incredible. I absolutely loved that experience.
In Addis Ababa.
Yeah, yeah,
Nice.
big running place.
Yeah, and that's also high altitude, just like Denver. So you must have felt like pretty at home. You were
Yeah,
born
I
at
mean, it's got the
altitude.
mountains, it's got the high altitude. Yeah, for sure.
Cool. So, like, and did you know the language over there? You just were able to, there's enough English spoken there.
Well, there's enough English spoken. I learned to like, I can order food, I can get in a taxi and get around a bit, but eh, no, it's kind of rough. My husband, he's Ethiopian,
Oh
so
wow! Can you tell us any? Can you just say hello in Ethiopian for us?
salam now, dananacho.
There you go. Awesome. Yeah, some of the best runners in the world are Ethiopian. So, um,
For
Kenenesi
sure.
Bekele, I believe. There's a couple others, but yeah, that's awesome. So Ethiopia, that's where you got excited, or not excited necessarily, but passionate about, making a change in the world. Um, and this was in landscape architecture. How did you move into plastic awareness?
Well, one thing we were doing with this program is Addis has all these parks that have kind of become like city parks, but they're kind of derelict and but they have interesting histories behind them. So with our students, we went around trying to kind of recover a lot of the history of these parks. And I remember specifically we were in one park and there's a river, and there's lots of rivers that run through Addis. But there was one river that ran through this park, and it was just So when it was completely filled with plastic bottles, and so you could just see the plastic bottles moving, but you couldn't actually see any of the water underneath the
Oh my
plastic
gosh,
bottles. So it's like moving plastic, and you're like, "I guess there's a river there, eh?"
the pollution
But
was
it's
that
just
bad. I mean, I've
it
seen
was
that also in places like Guatemala, where Four Ocean is using their river interceptor because unfortunately they don't have the same type of sanitation systems in some of these countries as we do in the United States. It just goes into the watershed. Some of the
Mhm.
dump sites are right outside the city, and it just they don't do the same thing that we do, which is burying it and capping it and picking up the trash. I mean, so it's a different system in some of the countries than that's what I learned from a local waste expert in Miami. Is we have more of an organized collection system in the United States, but we still have a big problem. So you
Yeah.
saw this big problem over there, and that made you want to do something about it. How did you
Well, it
involve?
was just one of those things that it really caught my attention where I was like, "Oh my gosh." And it's the compounding of a bunch of problems. Like, there's a lot of problems that Ethiopia faces. I mean, and so
Tell us
this is
about a
like
couple of them. Are they economic? Are they social? I know there's been some warfare in the past, but is it what's the big list of issues over there?
there's a lot. I mean, yeah, there's social and there's economic, and then there's also climate change. That's also affecting people quite a lot. And it's a country that's prone already to drought, and it's mostly a lot of the farmers, it's all rain-fed agriculture, so
Uh,
if the rains don't come, that's a problem, which is my master's thesis was looking at climate change in Ethiopia, and it was specifically looking at what's supposed to happen with the rain, what's supposed to happen with different things, and it was like every model was just showing it just shows increased unpredictability. And in a country where there's so many people that depend on rain, increased predictability is just a really dangerous element to add to it. So, yeah, the sanitation systems are not adequate. There's not enough money to make them adequate. The water, you can't drink the water out of the tap, so then you have to go get a plastic water bottle or a filtration system, which most people don't do. Most people get plastic water bottles, and then there's not a good way to dispose of them. So then they end up in that flood of plastic. And
and it's a big
yeah,
city, millions of people.
yeah, huge, huge
They
city.
can't import all the food like the United States, and that's not even responsible for any country. You need to be self-sufficient. So when floods or droughts happen, I mean, millions of people can die. I mean, I remember back in the 80s, there was a big fundraiser for the children of Ethiopia. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that was made the
And that
next.
was again linked to the social problems too, because there's also like, oh, that's we could have a whole nother episode
Yeah, I
on
think
that.
I
Like,
remember like a runner who won, the Olympics a couple Olympics ago from Ethiopia. He put up like an X when he went across the finish line. And
yeah,
that was a political statement
that
because,
was a political statement.
yeah. Can you tell us just a tiny bit? Is there just changes in government? There's what is it called? Where
Mhm.
the opposition and there's just turnover. Is it a stable government? I know. Is it a democracy? Is it
So
a lot of
the
questions?
time that the guy came, what did the X with his arms,
Yeah.
I was in Ethiopia at that time, and that was around the time we were leaving too, because it became too politically unstable to be there. And so you have over 80 different ethnic groups in Ethiopia.
Wow.
And so you also have
Because you hear
a
about
lot of
in Iraq, there's the two big ones. I'm sure there's more, but wow, 80. How do people get along? I know,
that's the problem. That's the problem.
sure.
So they all have like different versions of what happened historically, then they have historical grievances, and then you've got ethnic groups that are bigger than others, and then there's power plays between different ethnic groups. So, in short, that guy was protesting a government that had been in power for almost 3 decades, and it was an ethnic minority. So he was protesting that group being in power, and I need to be very careful with how I'm wording this, or we're
Oh, it's
going to
okay,
get
but they were
everybody in trouble.
targeting, I know people were getting targeted and his family, he was very worried about his family. and he was the
Yeah.
Olympic champion for the marathon. I forget his name right now. It's driving me crazy because
Feisa,
Yeah, Felice, Lelisa, yeah, something like that.
Feisa,
You're really close. I think his
so,
last name's Lelisa.
Lalisa. Yeah, yeah, Lalisa. I think that's it.
Mhm. Yeah,
So,
he won the Boston Marathon a couple of times too.
mhm.
Wow.
So then what happened is then that government fell. And then a new government came in power, but there was still like a lot of grievances. So then that led to the Civil War. And now there's officially no war, but there's still drones that are landing on people's houses and stuff.
Oh no. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like a transitory environment right now in the sense of like UN peacekeepers, maybe. Is the UN involved a little bit?
I don't think the UN, no, I don't think the UN peacekeepers are there actually.
Okay.
But the UN, like the African Union headquarters are in Addis, so they do meet there regularly. Um,
Okay.
not to
So
complain.
there's
African Union.
a lot of issues in their society that they're still working on.
Yeah.
So you left, and where did that take you?
So then I went back to Denver, where I'm from, and then I started volunteering with a local group in Denver called Canada Geese Protection Colorado. And there we were doing lake cleanups. So it was, and what was really amazing for me is you go to Denver parks, and I was like, oh, yeah, they're very clean. But then you put on waders and you get into the water, and then you're suddenly like, whoa, there's so much trash in these lakes. And I was really stunned. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm again seeing all this plastic pollution in the water. And then I was also like, while you're in the lakes, you're starting to see the frogs and the turtles and the egrets. And then we saw bald eagles and fish. And you see all these things. And you're like, this is the environment. And it's like difficult not to like
Yeah.
say, we're giving this environment to all this wildlife.
Yeah, it's like
And it was like,
it's heartless that humans don't care more about animals, and it's also we're part of nature, not above it. I like to keep, saying that on every episode. It's a delicate balance, and we are part of it. We're not above it. We depend on the ecosystems to survive, the forests, the water, purity, and that's why we have a Clean Water and Clean Air Act.
mm-hmm,
So,
yeah.
like, a lot of people feel like there's nothing they can do. And they feel like it's such a big problem. Where do I begin? We gave already a couple suggestions about doing an inventory of your home. Your purchasing power is your vote. What you
Mm-hmm,
spend your money on dictates how corporations spend their money and what they serve. So if we demand, recycled post-consumer materials, that's a better than virgin plastic. If we demand that these big beverage companies come up with a better, or just be responsible for their waste, first of all, and I
mm-hmm,
hope that's something that they do soon. I know part of your role is, advocacy and even lobbying for legislature,
mm-hmm,
state and federal
mm-hmm.
levels. So when did you get involved with PIRG? Do we want to fast forward to that, or is there anything in between with the geese and the river, or the lake cleanups? I don't want to fast forward too much, but there's so much I want to talk about between what's going on in Miami that's coming up and
Yeah, I mean, there was one lake in particular that we kind of adopted because it was just such a problematic lake. And I remember one thing that's like in that lake is you could just stand in one spot for 3 hours. That's how long our cleanups normally lasted for. And and you didn't have to move. Like there was so many layers of plastic bags, then bits of styrofoam and other bits of microplastic that you could just stay in that one area. And I remember like almost every cleanup thinking about like, should I go after just the macro big bottles, big plastic, or should I go after these tiny bits of plastic? Because that's like an immediate threat to the wildlife. But the big plastics are going to turn into the small plastics. And I was like, what a ridiculous sort of decision I'm like faced with. None of this should be here in the first place, much less that I've like, for my own sanity, I just need to move on cleaning. But then it's like, but
makes
you're
stuff
leaving all
easier.
this.
I mean, I do a river cleanup here in my backyard. There's a river called Little River, and there's a ton of manatees in it. I was paddleboarding, quick personal story, and about a year ago with my friends, and all these manatees live in the Little River. That's where they
Mm,
migrate to, and they like the fresh water. And during the winter, it's warm here in Miami, and we have hundreds of manatees literally in my backyard. Almost, it's like within a half a mile. But there was all this plastic everywhere, and there's also crocodiles out there, and fish and birds. plastic everywhere because it's in the middle of Miami, the city. Broke my heart to see the styrofoam
Mhm.
lunches floating with the name on the person still on it. It's like, this is not my trash. I've never littered. I'm on, in the sense that my parents raised me as a child and I saw the signs littering, $500 fine in Wisconsin, where I'm from, is like, to me, that's like a crime against humanity to throw something out the window. But like, I've seen people throw stuff out the window many times and it just breaks my heart. There's an education problem, but first of all, the problem was you see it and it breaks your heart. I went back to the river. I organized a cleanup for once a month on the paddle boards, and we go out there, 3 or 4 of us, and we bring back 4 or 5 garbage bags full of plastic bottles, alcohol bottles, every type of junk food you can imagine, wrappers and all the vaping stuff and all the smoking and
Mhm.
drinking stuff. It's all like mindless garbage, and a lot of it's, and there's no way to really stop it right away, but it, to raise awareness, I think, is the most important action we can do, and to also
Yeah.
not give up. Every little bit helps. Like, we did a
Mhm.
cleanup on Earth Day, and then we kept going out there, once a month. And I go back with my friends paddleboarding, and it looks much cleaner on the areas like the shorelines.
Mhm.
We went and cleaned up the shorelines as best we could. When
Mhm.
there's a big flood, it gets worse. So after the floods, after a big rainstorm, we go back out there. But because it's washing in from all these areas. But it,
Mhm.
for me, the first step was get rid of the big stuff. But then to your point, I've seen videos, I live close to the ocean too, about 3 miles away. I used to live right on the ocean in Miami Beach. And I've seen the videos where they take the sifters and they show you the microplastics from the sand. And it's one and the same. The sand and the microplastics are becoming a contiguous ecosystem. And they're saying the oceans are just turning into plastic. And in 30
Mhm.
years, it's going to be more plastic than we can even ever do anything about. I mean, they're cleaning up the Great Pacific Ocean patch. Yeah, plastic ocean. There you go. Tell us a little bit about your knowledge on that. I've been talking a little bit, and we want to learn from you.
Oh, that's just that it's just a book I happen to be reading, Plastic Ocean. I'm like, well, isn't that
Who's the author?
like perfect?
That looks interesting to me.
Captain Charles Moore. So
Okay.
he was one of the first people that went out in the Pacific Gyre and was recording all the trash in the gyre. And
Is
so
that the
this is a
floating
book.
island or whatever, the plastic island, the gyre?
Yeah, like
Okay.
yeah. So there's like five. I think they call. Well, there's an organization called Five Gyres. So I think there's five of these gyres in the ocean, and they're not like just like an island of trash, but that's how they call them. But they're just like because of the currents, it's where a bunch of the trash
I see.
collects. And so this book is about like his first, like he's a he has a boat and he goes out on boats and that's what he does. So he was one of the first people to really like, hey, we're just collecting a bunch of trash in our ocean. So this is his story of going out to the Pacific Gyre and trying to raise awareness about it.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're aware of the ocean. Is it cleanup project, where they take out that giant boat that brings it
Mm-hmm.
on board, and they've even gotten a lot of huge companies involved.
Mm-hmm.
They're making an impact on it, and they're also cleaning up places like Guatemala. And I was watching on YouTube; they did a cleanup in LA to demonstrate it, where the river flows out to the ocean. They put the
Mm-hmm.
interceptor first there to prove the
Mm-hmm.
concept, and then they took it to Guatemala, and they took it to Thailand and a couple other places, I'm sure. And there's other
Mm-hmm.
organizations doing it. Four Ocean out of Florida, we're a big fan of. I don't know if you've heard of them. They fishermen help retrieve some of the plastic and they use it for bracelets that they make and other things. From 8 pounds of ocean plastic go into one bracelet that they sell and raise awareness with and raise funds to, and they're paying
Mm-hmm.
fishermen to, retrieve
Mm-hmm.
plastic.
That's super.
But yeah, so tell us more about, the plastic problem before we get into how, and I want to talk about citizen-based monitoring
Okay.
and
So
PIRG.
yeah, plastic in general. So I think one thing that we can think about is like when we go out on these cleanups and you can see for yourself what type of plastic are you collecting. And it changes a little bit depending on where you are, but so much of it is single-use plastic. Like, and I think when we think of plastic, like some things you can justify they need to be made of plastic, like some medical equipment or some things that maybe that is just what is the most convenient material. But then there's these wasteful types of plastic, like plastic bags that you use for 5 minutes, or something that's wrapped in plastic that Did it even need to be wrapped in
That's so
plastic? You're
true. They
just
say
gonna
the average plastic bag is only used sometimes for like one use or two uses.
yeah.
It's
And it's like we have a calculator on our website, like for if a city banned plastic bags, how many plastic bags would be saved? And that's like an interesting calculator because it's always in the millions and billions of bags, depending on the size of the city, eh? So, I mean, that's just like, I think thinking about plastic and thinking about taking a step back and say, what do we actually need? Like, do I need that plastic bag? Is it that much of an inconvenience for me to bring my own bag?
I don't think it is. I've got 20 some reusable bags that I've been collecting over the years. I keep them in my car trunk. And when I go shopping at the grocery store, some stores don't even let you use, they don't give you plastic bags anymore down here. And that's good, but some do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like Whole Foods, I don't think, I might be wrong on that, but I know Aldi's, I'm an Aldi's shopper. And
Okay.
you have to take your own bag in there. And people use
Yeah,
box, reusable bags and all these. But I know, I'm hoping Publix will get rid of theirs. I know they sell the reusable bags, but please,
Mhm,
Publix, I know you're using them to make benches and stuff and grinding them. And there's a whole story about, recovering and grinding them and making other products, but they're ubiquitous. I see the Publix plastic bag floating in the river all the time. I see it in the ocean. I see it, everywhere floating through the streets, and so,
mhm.
but it's more than just a Publix problem. It's a societal problem.
For sure. And this, I just wanted to show you this because it happened to be right next to me. This is the little bag that's always in my backpack.
Oh, cool.
So, like, I have my takeaway ones, but then there's this one that's so easy to fit in anything. Like, I can always have that bag on me.
Yeah.
That's no problem.
Yeah.
So, so
Yeah. I
yeah,
think
I
that just,
think.
doing little things like that, that's a huge way that we can all make a difference is just stop being mindless. I hate to use that word because I don't want to judge people, but it is mindless. Mindfulness means thinking ahead, just like when you have to prepare your meal for your child. You mentioned that
Mhm,
you have a young son and um,
mhm,
that you have to do things ahead of time to ensure success in his life. Same thing for
mhm,
grocery shopping and for the planet is
mhm,
I like to think about the 7 generations philosophy is that, think
mhm,
about
mhm,
the next 7 generations and that are coming after us, and they're
mhm,
inheriting the earth and they're inheriting our problems. And we're either contributing to the problems or we're helping to, resolve these problems. Even if we can't, one person do it, one little action, they have these quotes about they
mhm,
compound, like if millions of
mhm,
people are using reusable bags, that's millions of probably billions of plastic bags because I haven't, I've been using my reusable bags for a couple of years. Not to say I'm perfect. There's been times I've gotten a plastic bag here and there, and it's just, but I'll use it for my garbage bag then. You know what I mean? Like I
mhm,
don't buy garbage bags. In fact, I just use I just take the
mhm.
garbage out piece by piece. I mean, there's a purpose for garbage bags too. I get it. But like, you don't need to be buying plastic in general. There's plenty of it that just you accumulate and
Mhm.
yeah. And use it for
For
things like plants. Like I'm a gardener and you can take your
mhm,
old plastic water bottle or your, after I
mhm,
buy collagen, that I take daily and after
mhm,
use the container, I make it into for my plants. I just drill holes in the bottom and then I put plants in it.
mhm.
Use it
That's
from
perfect.
yeah. Or other things
Yeah.
you can use it for refilling. Put
Mhm.
put your seeds in there, if your chia or flax or your or whatever you're buying in bulk, take it to the refill. I know it sounds so hippie, but hey, the hippies were onto something.
Hippies are onto something. I have to agree.
Got a little bit suppressed, and co-opted, but I think that they were onto something because, there's a reason why there was a big pushback against them and stigmatizing of their name is because, petrochemical industry has a lot of money.
It's got more money than I do.
So, PIRG, like, are we ready to talk a little bit more about PIRG or how do you want to
Sure. So I guess
tell us about PIRG?
um,
They're a nonprofit, right?
it's a nonprofit,
Are they
yeah.
federal?
And mhm,
Are they a federal agency? Are they, I'm saying they're not an agency, sorry, they're a nonprofit. Okay.
they're
So they're
nonprofit.
based out of Denver or do you have multiple?
We have multiple. So we have like two sister organizations. We've got a C4 and then a C3. So the C4 allows you to lobby. The C3 is more just research. So you have to balance your time between each one. And so we have the national PIRG and then we have state PIRGs too. So you have PIRG in Colorado. And so I work on the program team. So I work for the national, working on this issue nationally. But then I help out any states that are doing stuff specifically around pellets in states. So then our other sister organization is Environment America. And then Environment America also then has their state versions too. And they also have C3 and C4. A little bit complicated, but roughly that's it.
The C4 is for lobbying, you said, and for public
Yeah, so
advocacy.
because if you have just a C3, you're not allowed to really talk to politicians or say like, "Hey, I really think this policy would be a good policy." So then you have to have a C4 to be able to talk to
I'd never
politicians.
heard of a C4 before. I'd only heard of 501c3s, all the time, but never heard of a C4. So that's that right there. I mean, now I'm more equipped with knowledge on how I can support.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
how are you guys funded? Is it through donors 100%, or is there any federal funding?
There's no federal funders. It's all from donors, from small donations from our members, from people
Okay,
that
we're going to include that
say,
link.
"Hey, I like what you're doing." So then they do that. So that makes it's really good because that way we're independent. We're not we if we got federal funding, we might have to be a little bit mum on certain topics or these other things. But here we can, as an organization, decide what do we want to do as the organization.
Okay. Well,
So that's how I started working on plastic pellets. So one other thing is like our philosophy is like we also kind of highlight some of the issues that are kind of ridiculous. Like it's ridiculous plastic pellets that aren't even being used ever are going into waterways
yeah,
like
you were
that. And
telling me
then
that yesterday that like companies are getting away with dumping, and you guys have.
yeah, yeah, so these are
How did you guys
plastic. So
catch
these
wind of that? Were people reporting it? Did is
well,
how do you track that?
yeah, well, I wouldn't really say like they're like intentionally dumping. What I would say is they're like because these things are so small, they're so lightweight, they're so easy to lose. Like if I have some pellets in my hand and I'm holding them like this and a gust of wind comes, they've fallen off my hand. They're no longer there. So that's why it's so easy to lose them. And then there's like all these places in the plastic supply chain where they transfer the pellets from one facility to another facility. Those are all opportunities for these pellets to be lost.
Okay.
So the places that make these pellets, they often lose them. If a pellet, while they're making it, falls to the ground and it gets some dust on it, it's no longer a usable pellet. They would have to clean it. And these plastic is cheap.
Yeah.
So, like, when you're talking about, like, a pellet, it basically has no worth. It only has worth when you're talking about it in massive volumes. So, a few pellets lost here, a few pellets lost there doesn't affect a company's bottom line. So, like when they're being manufactured, they often fall to the floor and then they end up in the drainage systems of the factories. So then they get into the water systems that way.
I see.
Then in the US, they're normally transported by trains. So then you find a lot of the pellets along train tracks
Oh
where
my
their trains are moving through.
giant
And generally,
full of him. And then yeah, there's
hmm.
I had no idea.
Yeah, and so they're generally transported in like a hopper car. Like if you know how grain is transported, it's this, they're filled from the top and
Hmm.
then they use like a vacuum system to like suck it out. And so they use a similar thing with pellets. And so when you're opening those valves, if you're not careful, then pellets can fall to the ground. So you're supposed to put a tray underneath and then you have to be careful to close the valves. So often, for whatever reason, people forget to close the valve. So the train goes and it's just like leaves a trail of pellets behind it.
Wow.
And then the US is the biggest exporter of plastic pellets in the world.
I didn't
And so
wow.
so they often at ports they also have like bagging facilities that put these pellets into bags so then they can be easily exported. But if they're not careful with bagging, a few pellets lost there. And so this just like each of those places in the plastic supply chain end up losing pellets. And so ports and then imports. And so there's the International Maritime Organization, that's the UN arm of international trade. So they're right now, I think it's, again, don't quote me, I think it's in April. They're meeting to create more regulations around plastic pellets. And so one of the things they're trying to do is try to get it so that when you ship these pellets, you ship them not on the top of the ship, but down below, so that if a ship is in a storm, those containers aren't the ones falling off,
Okay.
because that's where you find a lot of pellets getting into the water.
Wow.
Yeah. And then another thing they're trying to do is they're trying to make regulations on how thick the bags are. Because as you're like shifting these heavy bags around, if you don't have a thicker plastic, then there gets tears in the bags. And then again, the pellets leak. And then also, then they get shipped to a factory that makes them. They fall to the floor. They're not useful. They again go into the storm water. And even at recycling facilities often turn the recycled plastic into pellets. So again, it's another opportunity that pellets can be lost.
So people, I don't know if everyone knows that, it takes oil to make plastic, petrochemicals, and it's how they make plastic is from oil. It's not from just magic. Just like your food is from a farmer, not from the grocery store. No, this education is so important. I don't want to rush you, but I want to make sure we cover all the topics in the next 15 minutes. And tell us about the citizen-based monitoring aspect and the International Plastic Pellet Hunt and upcoming events that people can get involved with.
For sure. So there's this great organization called Nerdle Patrol. So these plastic pellets can also be called nurdles. So Nerdle Patrol started, and it was developed by a scientist in Texas. And the scientists developed a scientific method because he found a bunch of pellets in his area. What's that part of Texas called? It's escaping me. Anyways, he found them on the beach there, and he was like, oh my gosh, there's so many pellets. So then he was like, I'm finding all these pellets. Is anyone else finding pellets? And then it was all these people started writing him about like, oh my God, we have so many pellets on our beaches. And they're writing from all over the country. So then he's like, I need to set up a monitoring system. So he set up Nerdle Patrol, which is this map, so anyone can go look for pellets and record what they find on the map. And so then there's an app. And so you can just say, okay, and you have to collect for 10-minute periods. So you can collect for 20-minute period, and then it will divide it in two for you. So you just record your time, how many pellets you found, and then it will geolocate you. So then it will be a spot on the map to show where this is. So this is a great tool because now we're finding out where are the hot spots of all this pellet pollution. So what we're also doing is we've got 2 exciting days coming up. And so one is for World Water Day, and that's in Miami, and that's together with Debris Free Oceans and Miami Waterkeeper and Environment Florida. So they're hosting a microplastic cleanup. So it's not just going to be pellets, but all types of microplastics. And that's going to be on March 15th.
Is that at Crandon Park? I think we're involved in that.
Yes, it is. It is. It is.
Yeah. Yeah. Free Ocean. Shout out to Amanda and Maddie Kaufman, the program director and manager. They're the ones who introduced us. And Amanda nominated you, and the Environment Florida, your colleague at Environment Florida, right? That's involved, and Miami Waterkeepers and Debris Free Oceans are all bringing everyone together for this cleanup. And you said it's in mid-April, and this is going to be Crandon Park, which is only about 15 minutes from where I am right now. So we're going to get the word out. We're going to share flyers. We're going to promote this podcast, and I'll be out there with the Sneaker Impact team. Because similar to, the plastics issue, we're preventing footwear from going into the landfills and oceans. So we're going to be, people are going to be bringing their unwanted sneakers, and we'll collect them there and provide a home for them and repair them and stuff. So, okay, that's awesome. So that's coming up in April. You have another event too, right?
Yes. So this one, if you're not in Miami, or if you are in Miami, either way, it's relevant to you. So this one is International Plastic Pellet Count. And so this one is PIRG together with the Water Keepers Alliance, Nerdle Patrol, who I mentioned earlier, and Five Gyres organization. And maybe some other ones are coming on board soon. We'll see. And so this is where you can go on a plastic pellet hunt to raise awareness of this. And we want this event to happen across the US. And it's become international because Five Gyres and Waterkeepers Alliance, they work internationally. So we should be having some pellet hunts also in Belize and Bangladesh and hopefully some other places too.
What
And
day is that?
sorry, say that again.
What's the date on that?
That one is May 3rd.
Okay, so was the first one's World Water Day, and
Hmm.
that's April 14th,
March 15th.
March 15th.
Yes. And then May 3rd. And so on May 3rd, that one's open. So if anybody wants to go on a pellet hunt, we have like a wish list of places where we would like you to go on a pellet hunt, but you
I'm
can go
doing it in my
anywhere.
local river, but because you got to start in your backyard. So everyone go in your
That's
backyard,
perfect.
the
Hmm.
closest waterway or the closest pollution. This is all about pollution too. That's a big key word today. This is
Hmm.
pollution of our
Hmm.
ecosystems, which are
For
critical.
sure. For sure. And if you're in an area where you might not have like a super high concentration of plastic pellets, that's okay. You can devote like a portion of the cleanup to plastic pellets, and then you could devote another portion of it to, I'm just going to pick up whatever plastic and whatever trash is in my backyard.
Sure.
Super.
Highways are always a good place to start, or roadways, cities. I mean, if you're in the middle of
Hmm.
the country, it's a little harder, hopefully, but maybe not. Um,
I'm going to be having one in Denver.
that's awesome. Next time I'm in Denver, I want to connect with you about, because I've been out there once or twice.
Oh, nice.
That's awesome. So citizen-based monitoring again is where citizens are trained to be scientists and collect data,
Hmm.
and that data
Hmm.
is so valuable because it can take a lot of work for scientists to get to all these places, that if we equip citizens and give them the tools and the app and
Hmm.
then they can help you with reporting. And citizen-based science and monitoring is a very awesome, powerful tool. So I don't think a lot of people know about that. I mean, I used to do it in Wisconsin for the wetlands, but I was an educator, and
Hmm.
so I just want to make sure we put a shout out to, like, you can be a scientist whether or not you got a degree in it. You can be a scientist, and you can also help be part of the problem, be part of the solution.
For
Um,
sure. And zero, if somebody goes out and they see zero pellets, that's still scientifically relevant and important information. So we
that's
want to know that too, because
yeah,
that's great.
yeah,
You
yeah.
don't have
Yeah,
pellets in your area.
figure out.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Well,
So,
so the river cleanups, all these events coming up are what's going on the next couple of months. How
mhm,
else can people get involved? Like, what are some of the social media they can tune into? How do they support PIRG?
mhm. Well, if you do want to get involved in any of these, you're more than welcome, anyone, to reach out to me. And one thing I'm going to be developing is a bunch of materials for people to help people go out on and do these things. And so it's like you want to just go out with your family, your friends, perfect. That's one level of engagement. You want to organize an event in your community, super. That's another level. If you want to organize an event and get the media out there, super, super. And we're there to help you. So, in any case, people can also reach out to me. Let me just give my email so that people, I'm more than happy to ever answer an email. So that my name is K Leviker, Leviker at PIRG.org. And then other ways, PIRG, we've got all the social medias that you can think of. We've got Facebook, we've got LinkedIn, we've got um,
Instagram.
Instagram, X,
Yep.
I guess.
Yeah, we're going to share
Then,
all those links. So, but
mhm.
you're sharing your personal email, which is so amazing. Are you coming to Miami, or are you going to be able to make it out here in the near future? We would love to show you Sneaker Impact and
I would love to. I don't have a plan right now to, but I would really love to. I love Miami. It's
well,
such a
next
fun
time you
city.
come here, don't forget about we want you to, we want to connect with you and see if we can set up, and your stuff in Denver too. We have we have a community throughout the U.S. We work with
Mhm.
running stores in Denver and in the Colorado area, and we can connect them with PIRG and get them
Oh,
involved, because
super.
runners care a lot about, they're also out there and they don't want, to, it's heartbreaking when
Mhm.
you see, whether it's a runner dropping their own trash, we've been talking a lot about too, which is your goo gels and your things that you use while you're running, whether it's in a race or
Mhm.
not. You should never drop that on the ground. Just put it in your shorts until you get home, or find the
Mhm.
nearest garbage can, because otherwise, unfortunately, you're part of the problem. It's no one else's job to pick up, your own stuff.
For
So
sure.
it's so simple, like these are things we teach our children, because we're raising them to be good citizens and earth citizens.
Mhm.
We're stewards. That's a theme we keep repeating too at Sneaker Impact News is we're all earth stewards. It's our planet. It's our home. There's no planet B. Like, I don't know. I was watching the movie Wall-E. I'm going to go back to that same analogy. I was watching it the other day, as well as Wild Robot, which I both very powerful movies. Have you seen Wild?
Yeah,
And
I
yeah,
have.
they're
It was
examining these issues, of
Mhm.
technology and human impact on the environment and how nature is so important to protect, because otherwise we can't replace it, and all of a sudden, if the earth can't, even sustain plant life or fungi, which are so important, or it's just completely polluted, then, what are we going to do? Go on a ship? I mean, that's no fun. I don't want to be on a ship. No.
No, and
Like
the
in
earth
Wally,
is
they're
so
all on the
beautiful.
ship and then they eventually come back to earth once, life can, be sustained. And they realize that, the wrong of their ways. We don't want to be judgy on this podcast. We just want to raise awareness because this is a real problem and it is affecting fertility rates and other things. Cancers are linked to this, and other problems from developmental to, you know, um, it accumulates, and that's not a good thing to have plastics accumulating in your body. So we need to keep talking about it until we can start to get more. What type of work, is PIRG doing on a federal level with some of the legislature?
Yeah, I think, well, what we were working on last year was the Plastic Pellet Free Waters Act, and we're hoping that that act will be reintroduced this year. In that act, it would prohibit companies from spilling pellets into waterways. So the companies that make, use, or transport plastic pellets. So we're hoping that that is going to happen, that will be reintroduced in a bipartisan manner this year. That's our hope. Um, and then also, I think what we're also doing is just like, what can we, there's lots of different ways that change can happen. It can happen at a federal level, it can happen at a state level, it can happen at the community level, it can happen at an individual level. So we're also doing a lot of exploration of what can happen in those other areas, state, local, right now. So, but we're also working on federally on like water, on wildlife crossings and right to repair bills in various states. And so there's a lot of stuff we're doing, but right now with plastic pellets, we're kind of just waiting.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we're not waiting. That's not true. We are not just waiting. We're still doing, like, we're organizing all these different days to help raise general awareness.
Mhm.
But we've kind of just shifted gears a little bit to working, raising general awareness and doing more research.
And California does have a law on the books, is what you had mentioned.
Yeah,
On
California has a
plastic
law on the
pollution.
books.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Texas has tried a law 3 different times, and it looks like they were probably gonna try another one this year. Illinois has a law that, was introduced this year. Virginia had a law that they introduced this year. Fortunately, it didn't pass, but it looks like that might again happen next year. So, and I think the more we talk about this, the more people can start to be like pushing for it. And even at like a city level, you can also push for, what do I want Denver to do?
Yeah.
Can Denver say, I don't want this? This is because it kind of becomes a black hole. You can use the Clean Water Act, but there's plastic isn't specifically specified. So there's
Versus like dioxin and PCBs and other pollutants that end up in the water from like paper mills and other plants. And
yeah.
I know that in Wisconsin we had some issues with pollution from, whether it was forestry or mining or whatever, and they were able to pass laws. I also know in Florida, cities have passed laws due to citizens getting together, coalitions, organizations, like shout out to Surf Rider and Clean Miami Beach and Debris Free Oceans. Together, those organizations and others got, the balloon ban in the state of Florida on a state level, but started out locally in certain cities,
Mhm,
as well as banning styrofoam in Miami Beach, banning plastic
mhm,
straws, banning even plastic bags in certain cities. And then
mhm,
once more cities get that law in
mhm,
place, and certainly we've seen also that it can get repealed, unfortunately, by the state government. So we have to get that snowball effect where the state and federal sees that enough people care. Because if it's a
Hmm.
priority, then they're going to do something about it. But if no one cares about it, they're not going to focus on it. And it's
Exactly.
going to be it's not out of sight, out of mind. But what's happening is now people are very concerned about the oceans, but they should
Hmm.
also be concerned. Well, the oceans are most of our planet, but we also have to be concerned about the wildlife. We talked about it's not, and human life, and about the 7 generations ahead of us. What type of health problems they're going to have because of the compounding. Plastics
Hmm.
didn't exist before a certain year, probably like what 1910 or whenever the petrochemical. Do you know the exact date of the plastics origin? It's got to be.
Yeah, I don't know the exact date, but I know there was like there's at least a story that it's like the um not bullet, what do you call it? Pool. The pool balls used to be made of ivory, and then the first kind of objects is like ivory, we can't, that's not sustainable, which is good. We don't need pool balls of ivory. But they made them out of plastic, and that was kind of like the first types, and Bakelite was like a first type of plastic. And then I don't think they really became like the single use plastic thing first started in like the 50s and 60s, even though they like slowly started gaining traction. But I think there's like a statistic, and it says like half of the world's plastics that we've ever made have been made roughly in the last 20 years.
Wow,
So
that's
it's like
mind blowing. Half of the world's
it's
plastic in the last.
exponential growth.
It's That's the best way to put it. I mean, there used to be glass bottles for everything, like even
Hmm.
Coca-Cola and all these companies. It was glass.
Hmm.
It does take energy, but at least black glass breaks down to sand, right? And
Hmm.
you know,
And
um,
it's much easier to recycle.
yep.
So,
Wow. It's something again that it's a little polarizing because some people are like, well, geez, there's so many problems in the world, deforestation, you know, um, war, poverty, plastic, which one do we go after? We have to look at all the problems. We can't turn a blind eye. And I'm so grateful for your work, Kelly, that you
thank
took this
you.
on as your life's mission. What does the future hold for you and PIRG?
I don't know, but I know I am going to
What are your
definitely.
hopes and dreams? What's 5 to 10 year outlook like? Where would you like to see this conversation be in 5 to 10 years from now, in the year 2030 and 2035, if you were able to wave a magic wand?
I feel like there's momentum gaining. Like there, like it can become a cultural issue if you so want to make it. But I feel like in general, people see a lot of plastic as wasteful. And I don't think, I mean, there's obviously some camps, but I feel like there's also a lot of common ground. So my hope is that in 5, 10 years, that common ground of like, this is just a common sense thing. We don't need to be having all this wasteful plastic everywhere. So I hope that just gains momentum, and then that's where we are, is we're like, okay, and it actually becomes a general consensus, and there's movement behind that. And I think, even in states where there's preemption laws on plastic and everywhere, there's people that are doing a lot of stuff. So I feel like there's a lot of momentum, even if you just look at, like, if you're just looking solely at what's happening politically, you could get disheartened potentially. But then you look at what people are doing, and there's so much power in that. And I don't see anything like, no matter where you are on the political divide, this microplastic, like those chemicals that are leaching into things, that's going to affect you. So it's not an inherently partisan issue, I don't think. I feel like this is something that we can, like, we're talking with a lot of trout fishermen, and they're like, yeah, why would they want to be fishing trout with plastic in them?
Yeah, I
That takes
used to
away
do trout.
the, like,
Yeah, I've fished before. Trout growing up, I was a fisherman quite a bit. So
so it's like that's so there. I feel like we can go into our camps, but we can also, there's so much common ground we can also find. So that's,
I love
I
the fact
hope.
that, citizens are doing so many inspiring things. We don't need to wait for the government, but we need to demand that the government does more too, because we need to hold some companies responsible that, that they should, help, in the sense that they're profiting. And this is, something that it's overproduction in some cases and overconsumption, and it's something that I think if we just encourage people, we don't have to have laws and regulations. If we just get it into the media more and into, the people, this is a problem. Like, let's not wait until the oceans are, over past what's the, that point where it's like the tipping point,
Mhm.
where we
Mhm.
can't go back.
No.
What are we going to do
We
then?
definitely
What are
we can't wait for that. We can't we can't. We have to act way
Go
before
back
that,
to
eh?
the ocean. I know that there's some fungi that are breaking down some plastics in the ocean that they found a certain species. That's just like a tiny, 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 tiny amount. That's not the global problem, and there's no magical solution to our plastic. We have to stop, buying it so much, I think, and
Mhm.
start using more, so let's create that snowball of positive
Mhm.
change through citizen action, and then the government will see that, and the voting power, and the people going to all these grocery stores. And I won't just throw Publix under the bus. I'll say Walmart. I'll say all the big retailers. They all got a Coca-Cola, PepsiCo. They all need to start thinking, and they probably are thinking about it. But
Mhm.
and it's a big problem, and I'm sure but like, we need a different system, in place for
Mhm.
these building blocks, so we don't have to use what's the name of the pellet again? It's called did you say
You can call it a nerdle.
Nerdle? Is that Nerdl?
Yes.
Nerdle. Okay, that's the first time I've heard that one. Well, I've
It's a
heard a
goofy
lot
word. That's why we've gone with like maybe plastic pellets is a better word because that kind of like simplistically describes what they are. And the nerdle is
of
just so
pellets.
cute.
Yeah, it is. It sounds like, yeah. What's the name of the app that people can use to track plastic?
Yeah, so there's an app that it's sorry, Nerdle Patrol.
Nerdle Patrol. Okay,
Hmm.
I'm gonna get that app.
It's
Um,
perfect.
cool. Well, I mean, we've had a great conversation today. Is there any other topics you want to cover? Any other passions you want to share? I know we were talking yesterday about botanical illustrations. You're also an artist.
Yes, I love doing botanical illustrations, a lost art. I think I could go on about that, but I think one thing for me that I really love about botanical illustrations is I find it so meditative to have to sit with a plant for so long and really observe all its details. Like you really start to, and you see how the plants move because you can't do a botanical illustration in a couple hours. You spend days with a plant and then you're like, ah, my leaf was like this and now my leaf is like this and you're like, oh, and it's also turned like this, and so you notice all these like minute details on it. So it's just a way to meditate with plants, really.
I love that. Slowing us down and observing nature. And there's so much going on. There's a secret life to everything, to the soil, to
Hmm.
plants. Plants communicate through fungi and through chemical signals and help protect each other and communicate and share nutrients. They share, isn't that interesting? And they have a symbiosis with many different things like ants, and it's a complex ecosystem. And, you know, it's a very delicate balance. Yet nature
Hmm.
is so strong and resilient, but um, we can't just, it's not like, it feels like it's almost like a boxing match between humankind and nature. Like, and, that's not a good thing. It should be a big hug, in the sense of like, where, love is what can help heal the earth. And love is also consideration, and thoughtfulness and kindness, and, helping animals, helping, ecosystems is so important. Don't ever get discouraged. When I go out and clean up trash sometimes and see people throw trash out their window, it discourages me, but it doesn't, stop me. It just, it's just a short term like reaction that like, well, maybe they're not in the same place in their life, and they're just, some people are living day to day, but we got to get out of that survival mentality, and realize that our earth is a living ecosystem, the entire thing. And
Hmm.
and it seems like it's such a big planet, but it's actually a very small planet. These are just some of my quick thoughts. What type of inspiring thoughts would you like to leave the Sneaker Impact audience and community with today?
I think something similar. Like I think you have a lot of power. People, as your group, as your community, there's some battles that are like, there and that seem impossible, but there's also things you can do here and recognizing what you can do right in front of you has a big impact. And that's how you can grow. And I also really agree with the thing, like you see somebody litter or something, it can be a very divisive thing, but it's also an opportunity to teach or to learn. And if you are angry or you give that person that anger, that's what you're teaching them. And so that's not going to be an effective way to message your ultimate goal, which is to have a beautiful relationship with nature for all of humanity. So also thinking like through your actions, like what are we doing that can help build those positive interactions? And then thinking, even like in these very divided times, there's not an enemy. There's just like, there's another human that has a family, that has their life, their cares. And what are those things that we can do to help forge those
Yeah, they might not
bonds?
understand the plastic problem.
No.
It's not like
And
they're
so there's no,
trying to hurt the planet. And screaming
no,
at them isn't going to help. It's almost going to cause a worse problem because you're going to get in a fight, or they're going to, get super angry too. And then you're just spreading anger. So just pick up the trash and do everyone, like I consider myself like, like I picked up a wrench this morning on the ground when I was on my run. And like, I was like Wally, I found a wrench on my run. I brought it home. I put it in my toolkit. If I see a water
nice.
bottle, I'm picking it up, and Wally puts it in his stomach and he crunches it up, and then he creates, and that's his job, is to clean up after all the humans. But, we can be Wally,
Hmm.
and Wally didn't scream at anyone,
No.
so, I used to get really angry. I didn't, I'd be like, this is my neighborhood. Why are you doing that? It's a neighbor. They're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You're right. Sometimes it's like a teenager, and, but at the same time, it wasn't right for me to yell. I'm just going to pick it up in the future and just keep going on my way, because it's just more pain in your heart that you're carrying. And we're
Mhm.
all one, human, consciousness. I believe, I think that we all have, there's a singularity in consciousness that we're all part of. And, we're
Mhm.
all, equally beautiful and have a right to live. And no one should be judged. You just keep going on your way and try to lead a path of kindness. And I think it'll multiply in the world. So your work is so important, because I don't think there's enough people focused on this issue. So I'm so glad you reached out to me, because we've never had a discussion on microplastics yet, or plastics in general. We've done cleanup topics, but with debris-free oceans, yes, we've talked a little about the plastics issue and Clean Miami Beach. But to really dive deep today, I hope people understand that they can reach out, they can get involved, and they can do something locally. And you have these two
Mhm.
awesome events coming up. So
But
yeah,
come join.
awesome.
Well,
Well,
thank
thanks,
you so
Kelly.
much for having me, and you're doing great work. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. We're going to have you back on in the future. I say that to everyone, because I want to keep bringing these guests on that are making an impact. Like, whether it's 6 months or 1 year from now, please reach out so we can keep in contact about how PIRG is doing, and the plastics cleanup. And this May and March, March, we're going to be out there in Crandon Park. So all my Miami people, make sure you can come out and help us on that day and spread the word that we can get the media involved, and really shine a light on this issue for World Water Day, and then the International Plastic Hunt in May. So thank you, Kelly.
Thank you so much.
All right, well, keep up the great work.
Thank you. You
All right,
too.
have a great day. We'll see you guys soon. Have a
Ciao.
good one.
Bye.
Bye.